A lot of good conversation out there. I'd love to hear it. As we kind of settle in today for today's lesson, I want to invite you to join me in 2 Corinthians 9. We're just going to read 2 verses to start things off here. The point is this: the person who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and the person who sows generously will also reap generously. Each person should do as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or out of compulsion, since God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make every grace overflow to you, so that in every way, always having everything you need, you may excel in every good work.
Have you ever been on the receiving end of someone else's generosity? I like that. There we go. Participation. Yeah, I have. I think of numerous times in my life where I've been on the receiving end of someone else's generosity, whether it was time, whether it was a gift, or whether it was someone who served me in some tangible way, where it was like, oh man, I felt the blessing of that. There's been a couple times in my life where I would say, like, I've been the beneficiary of, like, significant generosity. One of the most significant times of generosity for me and for my family was when we were actually invited to move across the country to help start Generations. So one of the things that I had to do is, in order to prepare for the move, say, hey, we're invited to come start a new church in an area of the country and physically move as a missionary of sorts to come here, was to raise funds and dollars and get pledges and people saying, we will commit money over the course of 3 to 5 years to essentially move us from Kentucky out to Vancouver. And so over the course of several months, standing in front of churches, individuals, businesses, basically saying, do you believe in what God is calling us to do enough to take, as Jonathan shared, some of your hard-earned money and commit over a consistent basis to see a new church started? And so we had to raise a significant amount of money in order to do that. That has carried us through. And one of the reasons you're sitting here today is because people from all over the country took some of their money that they had earned and God had blessed them with and said, we want to see a new church started. And that continues some to this day. And so they invested in us to see that new church started. And though eventually that Generations itself would be self-sustaining, meaning that it would grow to a place of maturity where we all collectively commit to say, we want to see this church continue to grow and thrive. Another example of generosity is some of what I just experienced in my everyday life with so many of my neighbors. And my hope is that you have a community of people, or that's what I would hope for you, is to have a community of people around you, whether it's in your workplace or in your neighborhood, or in some of you get it in your own family, where there's this kind of everyday generosity where you don't think twice about, like, oh, kid needs a snack. Cool, like, I'm just going to grab out a juice box or some goldfish, and here's a snack. Or I'm running to the store, and it's like, hey, texting people, does anyone need anything while I'm at the store? And you kind of don't think twice, but it's just like, hey, I'm aware of the people in my orbit, and I'm in close enough relationship with them, and in some way you're almost aware of your own money and your own budget and kind of your own finances, and maybe you're like, man, things feel a little tight right now, but you know that just because you're so committed to the community and it just flows so freely, that in essence, some of that will inevitably come back to you. And for me, like, that's something that my family experiences in our everyday life and community. And my hope is that you get to experience that too, whether through it's a kid, who maybe has finally grown up and worked hard enough and says, Dad, I'm taking you out to lunch. like, or something like that, where there's the kind of just notion where no one's even keeping score. And also you've got some of the discipline in your own life that there's some margin to facilitate greater good. My hope is that we continue to aspire to be a community here where we hear stories and have examples in real ways where it's like, yes, so-and-so bought me a Dutch Bros, because they texted me and they're on their way here, or lunch, or kids' snacks. But it's like just this everyday kind of generosity where people aren't keeping score. But also there's a pool of resources collectively that says we're doing something together for the greater good. Today we wrap up our series on church practices. We've looked at all kinds of different aspects of what we do when we gather, whether that's been baptism or communion or singing or preaching. Excuse me. And today we wrap up with generosity, both in an organizational sense and in the everyday sense. Now, let me say this kind of right off the cuff. I know sometimes that when you walk into a religious setting, hearing preaching about money or generosity in church can make people uncomfortable. Almost inevitably, when my team is hearing, hey, there's going to be a talk about kind of just generosity and money, they always ask me, Kyle, are you nervous about talking about money in front of the church? And what I just honestly say is no. And the reason why is because of two reasons in particular. One, we have a generous church. And so in many cases, what I am sharing is just an affirmation of what we're already doing. And second, because some of what Jonathan even shared is I believe so much in what God is calling us to do here in our community that asking people to step in and step up and say, let me give some of my money to what God is calling us to is not scary or intimidating. And okay, I'm a little off the cuff here. I'll add a third one. It's also because we want to be very transparent in where our money's going. At any point in time, you can ask me and say, Kyle, and we'll talk a little bit about that here in a moment, but where's the church's resources? Where's our money going? And can we see that? Can we know that? And the answer is simply, yes. We have nothing to hide. Just in the sense of that we talk about being everyday people here and around the room asking questions or looking through different things. The same thing is true. We're pulling our money together to do something with God, for each other, for our community because of Jesus. Full stop. And so there's no one's getting rich off this. There's no one who is we're not, there's no secret mansion. I can say that confidently as 4 kids. There's none of that. We are in this together. And what my greatest hope is that we experience the kind of collective generosity, the collective relationship that we are constantly aware of hearing needs and meeting needs. That when I think of some of the events over the last couple weeks, of whether it's difficulty with health or a tragedy that corresponded in Longview, that it's not oh my goodness, what do we do? It's I'm asking you all, who are you in relationship with? Who has needs? And how do we rally together and meet them? That's the organizational sense, because I know in reality, you can't be everywhere, neither can I, which is why we need together, and why I hope is we collect resources, that you give a portion of your money, and I'll get into the definition of that here in a moment, to say, God, use this for good. Use this for blessing in ways I may never be aware of or see and know. And you trust the leaders of the church, and we trust each other enough. And if you're skeptical, I understand that. You have probably great reason to be. But my hope is you experience trust, and you see it in practice here at Generations, that say, we step up and we see needs and we meet needs. We believe and we're transparent in what God has called us to do, and we step up and do that. We meet those needs. We share where we're at, and we share where we're going. So this is where we're going today. We're going to look at how God's people have always given, what the New Testament asks of us, because this isn't just Kyle's ideas, and where our church actually stands. And my hope is that you feel, like, again, if you've not given, or you come from a background where it's like, okay, here comes the sales pitch, or I feel guilty because I know I should and I don't, like that's my hope is not that to maybe remove the burden that you might feel or the conviction, but really just to say the simple invitation is, will you join us? That's when we talk about, like, during our response time, we make mention there's an opportunity to give. But I always want it to be a response to who God is, what he has done, and what he has provided for you. And then it's not out of cajole or manipulation, but it's simply out of response to who God is and what he has done. And so God uses kind of two ways. He uses the organic opportunity, and he also uses the disciplined approach that we want to invite you into. It's interesting because Jesus talked about money more than he talked about heaven and hell combined. Not because he needed it, again, he made the universe, but because he knew what money does to people. Matthew 6:21 says this, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Your heart follows your treasure. That's a diagnosis. And that's why giving matters. Not because God needs it, but because of what it does to you. It's another way for your heart to align with his, with the things he cares about, with the people he cares about. So, but long before Jesus, God gave his people a simple practice called the tithe. The word just means a tenth, or 10%. And here's the idea as plainly as I can say it. Imagine you've got 10 apples, and God says, give the first one back to me. Not the last apple, not the bruised one at the bottom of the basket, the first one right off the top. And why would God ask that? Is it because he's hungry? No. He made the tree the apple grew on. He doesn't need anything from you. But why the first apple? Because of what it does to you. When you give the first one back before you've taken a single bite, so whether you know they're good or not, before you know whether more are coming, you're saying with your hands, God, all 10 came from you. And I trust you for the next 10. And I trust that I can even live and survive on the 9 I have remaining. And I won't let these apples own my heart. That's the tithe. Give the first and best back to God, never the leftovers. And it's a way of remembering where it came from and keeping your grip loose. The Bible calls this the first fruits. Proverbs 3:9 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Now, that's kind of the principle there. But it's older than any set of really rules or the law that's described in the Old Testament. Before the law was ever given, Abram gave a tenth of everything to the priest Melchizedek. See, the tithe wasn't only a rule God imposed or a lifestyle that he invited Israel into. It was a response his people kept reaching for on their own. It's a way of saying thank you and I trust you, God. Because if we're honest, we always believe in our heart of hearts that we could use a little more. Whenever we believe we need a little more, whatever God provides will never be enough. Have you caught yourself saying that? Okay, God, if I just a little more, then I'll be generous. A little more, and then I'll make time. And what we find is the distance there is never closed. It's never closed. The math keeps changing. Let's look at, again, I've started to get there with where most people start with this concept of this tithe, and we'll get to how the New Testament through Jesus talks about this, but it's the nation of Israel in the Old Testament. So Abram did it before the law was even given, and then there's the law that's given in the Old Testament. And if you start to go through kind of a survey of the Old Testament, I have to warn you. If you're looking for math and numbers and the exact formula, if you like the precision of, Kyle, tell me the bar that I have to hit, give me the target, give me the number so that I can keep score, guess what? The math in the Old Testament gets really, really wonky. It's not as straightforward as you might think. Because when you try to add up all the tithing in the Old Testament, the numbers get complicated. There was a tithe for the Levites every year, so the people who served God in the temple. But then there was a second tithe of what they had, where families brought to the festivals and ate in celebration. At any point in time, they would give 10% of what they had for the feasts and the celebration and the festivals. And every third year, a tithe is stored up for the poor at that point in time, and add it together, a faithful Israelite would ultimately give way beyond 10%, maybe closer to 20% or more. And that's before any sort of first fruits offering and leaving the edges of the fields. So again, when they would harvest their fields, they were asked to leave the edges unharvested so the poor could come and glean those crops and have something to eat. If you're catching on what I'm trying to say here, is if you're looking for a formula or the math or what's the bar or the target, you start to get, it's just not there. And that's kind of the whole point. If you're trying to get a calculator and find the exact percentage that God required, whether it's gross or net, you'll tie yourself in knots. And that knot is a sign you've already missed it. If you're trying to keep the math perfectly straight, you're doing it wrong. The moment you're hunting for the minimum that satisfies the requirement, you've stopped giving and started negotiating. And what my hope is that we don't enter into a negotiation or a relationship with God where it's all based on cause and effect. But it comes from a place and a commitment to a people and ultimately to God, that everything you do in terms of generosity and how you live your life is a simple response to what He has done for you. And anytime you start negotiating, you make it more so about yourself than what God is doing. See, generosity, even for the people in the Old Testament, was never meant to be legalistic. The tithe was never a tax code to optimize. The principle behind the original numbers is simple. At any point in time with what you have, give God the 10% at set times and let it create dependence on Him. 10% isn't some magic number or some standard that we should be constantly keeping score of. But it was simply a starting line. It was a barometer. It was a way to say, God, where my treasure is, my heart is. At the place in my life, am I a generous person in practicality, not in terms of wishful thinking? It was a training wheel for dependence. And here's where the New Testament turns. It's bigger than most people expected. When Jesus and the apostles come, they actually don't lower the bar. They don't kind of rearrange the table. They kind of remove the floor entirely. There's no give 10% rule anywhere in the New Testament. So as followers of Jesus, the rule here is not, from Kyle for the church, show up and give 10%. You won't hear that. It's not for me. We don't see that consistent in the New Testament. There's no required minimum to satisfy. Instead, there's something harder. And I truly mean that. I do think it's harder because you know the quality and the status of your own heart. You know the depth maybe of your selfishness or selflessness. You know whether you're negotiating with God on a consistent basis or not. You know when you're looking at how you're going to spend your time, your energy, your money. All right, God, where's my heart? If you're constantly looking for a loophole when someone shows up in front of you and you're like, ooh, I hear a need there. Someone could use a car. Someone could use $20 for gas. I'm not ready, God. I don't have enough. Or I need more. If you're constantly in that space of where that math is changing, you know the quality of your own heart. And what the New Testament simply encourages us is that realized generosity knows no ceiling and has no floor. So that 10% can be used to inform your generosity, but it's not the rule or the limit. See, that the sharp edge of that, again, is you can simply declare yourself a generous person. But generosity that lives only as a sentence you say about yourself isn't generosity. It's self-image. The New Testament has no interest in people who feel generous. It calls for generosity that has been realized, actually given, actually demonstrated, actually visible in where your money went. You don't get to be generous in theory. You're either doing it or you're not. And a good example is Paul's letter to the Corinthian church about collecting money for the needs of the poor believers in Jerusalem during a famine. Paul implores them to make room in their hearts for him and others and live out the generosity they have claimed. In essence, he's actually kind of teasing them. If you read 2 Corinthians 7, 8, and 9, kind of fully in context, he's kind of teasing them like a good friend would and say, like, I know what you're saying, but come on now. He says this in 2 Corinthians 8, 7, but since you excel in everything, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. Giving is a grace. No reciprocal mentality, no scorecard, no expectation of what you'll get out of it. A follower of Jesus gives because Jesus gave. 2 Corinthians 8, 9, for you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich for your sake, he became poor, so that by his poverty you might become rich. That's our example. And he talks about, what I love about the scriptures is they're practical. It's everyday life that they're speaking to. 2 Corinthians 9, 6 says this, for whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will also reap generously. It's this farming picture. Go back to the apples. You can't control the outcome of what the tree produces. I know modern science is pretty dang incredible. We think we can control a lot, but there's some things that we have very little control over. See, farming, anyone who farms or gardens or tries to grow something, it's a time-delayed act of trust. You put a seed in the ground, and guess what? Nothing happens that day that you can see. You can't dig up your expected produce the next morning and check on it. You have to wait. You have to trust the soil and the season. Giving works the same way. A stingy posture grows a stingy life. A generous posture grows something that flourishes. And it's not always in your bank account, but it's always in who you're becoming. 2 Corinthians 9, 7 says, each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. Paul takes the pressure off completely. God doesn't want money you gave because you felt guilty or trapped, but it's because of the decision is made in your heart as a response. Maybe it's beforehand, deliberately, freely. The word cheerful is the Greek word from which we actually get the word hilarious. Paul describes giving so free that it's almost laughable. No strings attached, no second thought. It's just the joy of someone who stopped white-knuckling their money and found freedom on the other side of the open hand. So not reluctantly or under compulsion. You know, it's interesting because science and kind of research have done all kinds of studies in the business world of like, how do you create organizations that get the most out of people, or you know, how do you get something that produces to produce an outcome? But in all of this, it's so funny because, again, kind of come back to that word hilarious. It's like there was one study done recently in 2008 where these researchers gave people money and told half the people to spend it on themselves and the other half to spend it on someone else, and then quote-unquote measured their happiness and what they got. The result held that no matter the amount, the people who spent on someone else were measurably happier. They actually repeated this study in different cultures and different nations, Canada, India, South Africa, Uganda, and the pattern held true everywhere. That to be generous, to care for the lives of others, actually returns some measure of joy and happiness. And you always can't quantify that, but you kind of know that in your own life. That maybe that bitterness or that peace that takes root in your soul, that steady dissatisfaction. You know, what's wired into us is that when we give and when we live generously, we rewire our brain. We rewire our connectivity. It gives us a pleasurable outcome, just as maybe a satisfying piece of dessert or a steak. We are built to find joy and generosity, exactly as Paul said 2,000 years ago, before anyone could run a brain scan. The cheerful giver turns out to be the one who always walks away cheerful. 2 Corinthians 9:8. And God is able to bless you abundantly so that in all things, at all times, having all that you need, you will abound in every good work. The ground underneath all of it is the reason that you can give is not that you have plenty to spare. The reason is that God is able. It's scarcity or abundance mindset. If he made it all, he controls it all, he can produce it all. Do you believe there is enough love, there's enough grace, there's enough stuff to actually go around? And so when you work hard and when you show up in that 9 to 5 or you show up in that 10 to 4 a.m. morning and you're working and you're grinding and you're trying to produce something, or maybe for some of you, you're not even able to work and produce and you're dependent, in all of those scenarios, you know that it's the Lord who will provide. And it's the Lord who gives you both the ability and the provision. See, the reason you can give is not that you have plenty to spare or because of your own ability. It's the reason is because God is able. Why could a farmer give the first fruit of the harvest before knowing how the year would go? It's because he trusted the God who made the field. Every gift is a small statement. I believe God's supply is bigger than my need. And at Generations, we must practice this. It's not a nice theory or a good opportunity. It's a necessity. If we want to radically reorient people to the love and the grace that Jesus, to the fact that he gave up his life for them and that the resurrection is real and tangible, it should be evidence in practical ways in our life for how we hold on to our stuff, our time, and our energy. One that says we don't give to get, but we give because we've already received. It shows up when how we talk about our money and our stuff. It even shows up like when I stand in front of you and talk about giving to the church. It's like, I do want you to give to the mission of Generations. Like, I don't have to apologize for that. I believe in what God has called us to do. But I also know it has to be a response. It has to be what God has put on your heart. It has to be because you are so just joyfully, maybe even in moments of hardship, like just you're following Jesus to such a degree that you can trust him, and you're learning to trust him, that it shows up in what you give. It's why we have both the black boxes and online. It's why you can give in a check or digitally. It's why you can give your stock and your crypto, because I want to create as many opportunities for you to give, to say, this stuff doesn't grip my heart in the way that Jesus does. Jesus grips my heart more than what I have or what I can earn. And so while those are the means by which you can give, the kinds of things that you can give to, I just, again, want to be transparent. I'll tell you where your money goes. It's both for our operations sense, and it's for the things we believe in the community. It's why we've got baby bottles up front. You know, if you've not seen those, it's where we collect money for Options 360. And it's for a nonprofit in our community. Yes, a nonprofit collecting money for another nonprofit. It's because we partner to do good works in our community. It's why we pack Thanksgiving baskets, you know, around the holidays. It's not because all the money we want to bring in just stays for us. It's in some ways we're a conduit for where the needs are needed the most. And we can bring people together to say, we want to make sure families and kids have food at very important times during the year, and maybe even for all year. Like we're looking for those opportunities. So it's why we talk about when we family story, and we're going to camping at the coast here in a couple weeks to talk about, you know, missions and what God is doing around the world. Like, why do we talk about it? It's because we are partnering with God to live generously and join him in what he is doing. And so I also just like to periodically just level set on, like, some of you have given your time, your talents, like your treasure, to stay with the alliteration, maybe that you've heard before, like 2 generations. And so how is the church doing? Let me talk in probably a series of numbers. Richard, go ahead and put up the first set. Like, as of 4:30, we brought in $63,000 versus our expenses of $60,000. Like, that's good. Like that's great. Like, we're in good. Go ahead and put up the next one. That's income versus expenses. Then we have our actual versus our budget as of 4:30. We brought in $63,000 versus our original budget was about $65,000. Now, you might be wondering, like, Kyle, what's the difference between like the first set of numbers and the next set of numbers? It's we are bringing in more than we are spending. Our staff team is doing a great job at managing expenses. I want you to know that we are frugal and we know how to stretch a buck around here. Like we are not willy-nilly just spending stuff. But we also just want to admit, like, that 65 is what we had aspired to bring in to further our collective efforts. We would love to see that number grow because we want to step in to what God is calling us and inviting us to. Like, we want to plan for the future. We want to make room for more people. There are more needs that show up in our community that we want to be able to simply respond to without having to maybe go to individual people. While we don't shirk back from that, we also know that you can't be every place everywhere. And so sometimes needs come to the church from our community, and we want to be able to step up and meet those. And so that's why we also want to see that second number continue to grow. And so if you're like, well, Kyle, how does that 63 break down? I will also say, I mentioned those churches at the beginning that have partnered with us and individuals who partnered with us to see Generation started. The place we're at is we would love to see what we actually bring in mostly come from our congregation or for businesses and partners here. What we know is still about 80% of that number 80% of that number comes from us. There's about $8,000 of that number that still comes from outside support or from our rentals. Again, we know how to stretch kind of a buck. We want to see that number helps us further our mission. Our ideal target is that at least 40% of our ministry budget goes to equipping needs, support, and 10% goes to missions and church planting. Like, we want to see the kingdom of God furthered. So that's our ideal. Right now, because of where we're at in this space, we have at least 60 to 65% of our budget simply goes to kind of the facility. And so one of the things I did at a vision night at the start of the year was simply lay at the feet of Generations our next step, where God would have us go. Because while we love a physical facility, and it's provided us a great opportunity to gather, God's people can gather anywhere. We are a family because of Jesus. And so what we want to make sure is that we are stewarding the resources that you have worked hard for, that God has blessed you with, and putting it back where God would have us. And maybe that means an actual facility, maybe that means something else, but we want to steward that well so that it goes more towards needs and spiritual formation than maybe it does to a tactile facility. We intend to make room and set aside for some future growth. The ideal is that we continue to pull our money together to build a good world with God for others, where we see God's family expand and grow, and that generations to come will know the name of the Lord and what he has done. So that's what we're committed to. So when we talk about numbers and opportunity, that's the direction that we're headed with it. And how do we get there? How do we see that grow? How do we pull our monies together? We see people go from, frankly, from consumers, which our world forms us, to contributors. It's a shift from what I call vision cheerleaders, you all go get them, to say vision partners. I'm in this with you, together. We're on the same team. Let's figure out how to do this together. It's those small shifts that allow us to continue to see God's family expand and grow. For us to be nimble and agile and keep the focus on the main thing. People trusting and following Jesus. And so, here at the end, I just hope that as we have talked about the church practice of generosity and giving, that you ask the Lord, how do you step into that? Where are you at in that story? I know for some of you who maybe aren't followers of Jesus yet, you heard me say, our example is Jesus. And so maybe you're not there yet. You don't, and let me just say, if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, you don't have to give to come and participate. I know I mentioned that shift. We want you to find ways to contribute and join in, but you don't have to give to belong here. No one's tracking what you do or don't do. I'm not keeping score. But I will say the honest observation is the people who've grown the most, and especially I've seen who've grown the most in this church, almost always have a story about money. The moment they loosened their grip, who gave something significant and found they were freer on the other side. Again, not richer, always, but definitely freer. And so pay attention to those stories if you're not a follower of Jesus yet, about how people are interacting with money. And for some of you where, when we talk about giving and generosity and, maybe even, the thought of 10%, you're doing the math of your own budget and you're like, that feels impossible right now, Kyle. Don't you realize the cost of living? Right now, rent, groceries, childcare, they're brutal. Giving away, even thinking about 10%, freaks me out. Let alone 2%, just feels impossible. If that's you, again, I just want to meet you with grace, because that's what God does. He's not standing over you with a calculator. He's not standing over you with a spreadsheet. But it's also okay to test and lay out some things for him. To quit doing he's a God of abundance. Sometimes the math doesn't work. There are plenty of people, when I talk about stories in this room, who could tell you, my math didn't work. I had it all planned out and I was supposed to be short, and I wasn't. Sometimes what God is after most is your heart. And right now it's so closed off that you can't even think about the potential to give. And maybe the practice of just being generous in some aspect loosens the grip on your heart so that you can see where God is at and how he wants to meet you, and how he is so gracious and how he is so loving. And so if you're in a genuinely hard season, like, just maybe start where you can. Respond with a simple, generous act. Work with someone. Like, maybe some of the problem is, like, you just never sat down and worked with someone to even develop a plan. Like, you never even thought that was possible. We've got some pretty smart people in the church, too, who's also good at confidentiality, who would love to sit down and do a budget with you. Like, there's a few people who, like, the most exciting thing you could ask them is, could we sit down and do a budget? Like that's a real thing. And, like, not all of us are budget people. For some of us, we think that's the B word. That's the reality. Like, but there are people who would love to do that, like with you, like, who are gifted in that. And so, like, don't let that be a barrier. Like sometimes it's asking for help and being humble enough to say, like, I'm not good at this stuff. Can someone help me? They would love to do that with you. And so, like, if you're nervous about that, come talk with me. I would love to have that conversation with you and do it in such a way that, like, you see where God is at work in your life, because that's the ultimate goal. And so Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, he's honest enough to name something. There's definitely two differences in the heart. They look identical from the outside. One says, I want to grow in generosity, and I'm not there yet. The season is hard, but I'm moving towards it and trusting God in this stretch. The other says, I've arranged my life so I've never actually have to get there. I'll give when it's comfortable, when it costs nothing. There's one heart that's decided in advance to keep its grip closed. And the other, that's the posture and that's what Paul confronts when he says to give not reluctantly or not under compulsion. The question isn't can you afford 10%? Or can I afford 2%? The question is which direction is my heart moving? Is it towards dependence on God? Is it towards response to him and his people, or away from it? And so my hope is that today, as we've talked about money, as we talked about the church practice of generosity, is that you take this opportunity as something to step into and join with God in what he is doing. So maybe stop trying to keep all the math straight and simply move in response. I was asked this week, again, several times in preparation for this, Kyle, how do you feel about kind of giving this talk and the status and the lay of the land? You saw the numbers. And it's like, man, I'm trusting God for the future. Like, I believe in what he's called us to do, and I just so desperately want people to step into it. Like, my prayer is that we expand God's family, like, so much that it's like, we get to see a need, meet a need. That we live our faith every day, everywhere. And it's both in an organizational sense that people can trust the church again with their money, but also they live so generously in their everyday life that they can trust Jesus and his church again. May we be that people who live out that vision and that reality.